there is this illusion in the Kremlin that Russia can indefinitely continue, and until this illusion isn't broken, the Kremlin will not accept a peace plan because they feel they can win, and that's something that Putin clearly stated.
Now, the United States and Ukraine have drawn up a new 19-point peace plan to replace, we were talking about them yesterday, the previous proposals backed by President Trump. The plan that emerged last week was drafted by American and Russian negotiators. It caused really alarm in Ukraine and from Ukraine's allies because it said Ukraine should cede land to Russia that was still under its control, barred Kyiv from ever joining NATO, and imposed limits on the size of Ukraine's armed forces. So what's in the new proposals? They haven't been published yet. But we can speak now to Alexander Query, a war reporter who's been living in Ukraine for the last 9 years. Alexander, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for hosting me.
So the Ukrainian First Deputy Foreign Minister says there's this new proposal. At this stage, all we really know actually is that it's got 19 points in it. Do you have any more insight of the detail?
We don't necessarily have any more insight on the details so far, but what we do know is that this version actually kind of fits the Ukrainian version or the Ukrainian side better. We also know that the Ukrainian side clearly stated straight line. Not giving territories, no limit on the army, etc., etc. So it is still, it is still indeed a work in progress, but at the very least, it is not the version that was indeed submitted last week by, the US, and who was, let's say, heavily dictated, if not dictated, by the Kremlin directly. So in a way, there is progress indeed, but there is still work to do on this document. But the main thing here for Ukraine was mostly to move the deadline, the famous deadline that Trump gave Ukraine, the sort of Thanksgiving deadline, because Trump reportedly said and told through his envoys to Ukraine, that Ukraine had to sign this document, the one dictated by the Kremlin, by Thursday, which apparently this kind of line will move.
Yeah, I think there's now some acceptance, there's some flexibility on that deadline. As we know, the Ukrainian president gives a sort of nightly address. He last night seemed to be much more positive about this new set of agreements, or at least negotiated plans that had been put forward. We're in a much better position from Ukraine's point of view now than we were 48 hours ago.
It is true, but in the meantime, it's also important for him to show to the American side that Ukraine is willing to work with the US, that Ukraine is willing to give a hand there, and that's something that Zelensky insists on regularly, really on a regular basis, which is that Ukraine is not an obstacle to peace, right? Ukraine is actually there to work with its international allies to actually go towards peace and to sort of build this image of a country that is willing, to work with international partner compared to Russia, which is, as I'm talking to you right now, it's 7:30-ish in the Ukrainian capital. We're still going through a mass attack. We can hear actually the air defense outside, which actually shows that Russia is absolutely not willing to sign any document stopping this war, and that's also for Zelensky important for Zelensky to show that Ukraine actually wants to stop it.
Because all of these conversations, these negotiations that have been taking place either in the US with the Russians, these ones in Geneva, has it had any impact on what's actually happening on the front line?
The answer is no. The answer is no, because as we can see, there are a few hotspots today. I'm talking about the city of Pokrovsk, for instance, which is, from what we hear from reports and from what we see, mainly controlled by the Russians now. I want to say at least 2/3. The city of Kupiansk is slowly getting also back into Russian control, knowing that it's actually terrible for people of Kupiansk because they lived through Russian occupation already throughout 2022. Then this city was liberated, and then, we see the Russians coming in again. So these are really important hotspots. We also see that Russia is continuing to push while fixating Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk. Russia is continuing to push in the direction of Zaporizhia Oblast. Recently, it reportedly took between 15 and 16 villages around there. Now, when it comes to this report, and that's also important to point out, there is an underlying issue among Ukrainian armed forces here, and that's also an issue that happened around the area of Dobropila, for instance. There are issues of misleading reports because suddenly we discover that there's like Russian breakthrough here and there. It's not that they are that fast. It's just that some local commandos unit tend not to report that there are failures on the battlefield, and that has become very, very problematic.
Yeah, well, of course, if you don't have a realistic, accurate picture of what is happening in terms of who's gaining and losing territory, that these talks, this revised draft, the next steps, the draft's going to be taken back to Washington and to Kyiv, briefed to the presidents. The hope then, Alexander, that's being reported today is the Trump administration would then be expected to approach Moscow to advance the talks. How much optimism is there that this deal would be something that President Putin would be open to?
Well, in fairness, there's not much optimism because, again, when we refer to the first draft of this peace deal, most of the conditions that have been taken out of the draft refer to, let's say, Vladimir Putin's obsessions, say Ukraine's, quote, denazification, this sort of reintroducing Russian Orthodox Church, which is, in effect, a branch of Russia's secret service, etc., etc. These conditions, these maximalist demands, we can see that since 2022 and the first start in Istanbul of peace talks, these demands didn't change. And every time there's one demand that doesn't really fit the Kremlin, the plan is rejected entirely. Today, the Kremlin still believes that it can win in Ukraine. It is a brutal war of attrition indeed. And in effect, if we zoom out over a year, Russia only took 1% of Ukrainian territory at the cost of thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. But still, there is this illusion in the Kremlin that Russia can indefinitely continue. And until this illusion isn't broken, the Kremlin will not accept a peace plan because they feel they can win. And that's something that Putin clearly stated. There's not going to be any talk of peace plan until Russia, quote, has success on the battlefield.
Well, absolutely. That makes sense completely. Thank you very much, Alexander Query, the war reporter there, giving us more context into really what's happening behind the scenes as those negotiations sort of finalised yesterday and what the next steps are.